Be talking about, as it says up there, is offshoring application development. Is it a financial dream, or is it a security nightmare, or is it both? My cultural background, I originally come from India. So, you know, a huge offshore destination, of course. I understand the culture and the mindset there. Every third guy I know is either a database administrator or a software developer. And I talk to them a lot. They went to college with me, and I understand what their thoughts are on security. So I'm going to relay some of those to you. And at the same time, of course, my experience here in the US over the last 9 years in the security industry has been helping a lot of companies out with application security initiatives and so on, and the challenges they deal with. So I'm going to combine both those to give you some perspective on what to do and what not to when you're offshoring application development. So for starters, the business drivers of offshoring. That picture is pretty telling in itself, right? But there's some definite business drivers, and that's the reason there's a lot of offshoring these days. The effective cost structure, of course. I mean, you know, you can get things done a lot cheaper, be it in India or Vietnam or Eastern Europe, what have you. So there's a compelling case for a CIO or a head of application development to say, let's send it out there. Obviously, there's a strong knowledge base too. Like I said, you know, a while ago I put out a job request for my company looking for developers, and it was hard to find. It was hard to get qualified resumes. You put it out in India or a place like that, you'll be overwhelmed because, like I said, if you're not a database admin or you're not a developer, you failed in life. And that's the attitude out there. So there's a lot of there's a strong knowledge base to be tapped into, of course. And then there's the whole with, you know, the 24/7 work model. You have things happening here. When it's night here, people working there. So combination of those things. Of course, I'm not here to talk about the businesses of offshoring, but just kind of putting across the point that offshoring is definitely here to stay unless there's some pretty stiff regulatory controls that prevent it. Just a little more perspective on why this topic is of any importance. I grabbed some statistics from the internet. 84% of 500 companies that were interviewed by Information Week said that they actually offshored application development. And you know, outsourcing of enterprise applications is also growing, and B2B and B2C applications are top candidates. So what does that tell us? Outsourcing, and a subset of which is offshoring, are on the up, and primarily application development is what's being sent out there. So being a security person, that raises some concerns in my mind. Just for starters, whose job is security? Now, how many of you in this room have heard of that everybody, somebody, nobody joke? That's kind of what I look at security when you offshore development as. Everyone's just pointing the finger at the other person. It says everybody is supposed to do it, somebody did it, nobody did it, what have you. And I've been involved in a lot of situations with a lot of my clients where, and I'll show you some examples, walk in there, look at an application from a security perspective, be it a source code review or an application pen test, and security is just atrocious, for lack of a better word. It's just horrible. And then when I asked them, I was like, you know, were your developers on drugs when they were developing this? They said, well, they weren't our developers. And what am I going to do? It was developed in a different country. Well, there is a lot you can do, even because it still is your application. The liability is still yours. So kind of solving this problem of security, whose job is it, and what parts of it should be played by whom is what I'm here to talk about. As a result of that whole finger-pointing, blaming game, what I've seen is a few different impacts. The first of which, you know, this graphic here, I'll explain it to you, is pretty telling. We did penetration tests for this bank, a lot of them, New York-based bank actually, and every quarter we would show them what their overall security posture in terms of web applications look like. So we would kind of classify the vulnerabilities at a very high level for senior management and tell them, well, these are some trends we're noticing. Now, if you look at this graphic here, you notice that 5 out of 5 applications here had input validation issues. I know that's a pretty sweeping statement, input validation. A lot of issues fall under that umbrella, but these were critical input validation flaws in banking applications across the board. And as you can see, 4 out of the 5 had authorization issues. We said, well, maybe there's something to be learned from the developers who developed the one which didn't have the authorization issues, right? Well, it just so turned out that that application really didn't have any multiple user levels, so there was no question of authorization. And that's the only reason we didn't see an authorization issue there. But as you can see, when we took this to their senior management, said there looks to be a systemic problem here. You're seeing a recurring trend. You know, rather than tactically trying to solve individual security bugs in applications, this needs to be looked at a strategic level. Well, the response was, the apps are developed offshore. We have no control. And they were ready to shrug off the risk by saying, well, we'll have to figure it out here, but really we can't systematically look at it and say, you know, early in the life cycle it should be taken care of, because that life cycle is not under our control. So recurring vulnerabilities, this graph, probably obviously everyone in this room seen it 100 times. I just put it up here, but in general, what I've noticed is when we look at applications after the fact, which have been developed offshore and there's been poor liaising on the security front, it's always trying to solve the issues at this final stage, which the only people having fun at that point are lawyers. And then obviously regulatory issues. You know, I'm sure all of you are familiar with this alphabet soup that I put up here, and every information security person loves to play the FUD tactics of throwing these names out, so everyone's all scared and say, well, security is important because of the regulatory implications. But you know, if you look at it real carefully, of course, with PCI, like everyone knows here, as of this year, there's certain specific application security requirements in there, and I'm not going to go down the path of bashing PCI and Visa, because that'll take away the whole 45 minutes then. So I'll refrain from that, and I hope there's no one from Visa out here right now while I said that. But in essence, you know, the point I'm trying to get across here is that the liabilities due to these regulations and controls are still yours. The regulatory bodies don't care a damn if you develop the application offshore, in-house, or somewhere else. They're still your liability. So I'm going to skip this one. The GLBA one, actually, I just pulled out the excerpt from them, and they seem to be kind of more on the mark as far as addressing this problem specifically and correctly in my mind. You know, they really talk about vendor management programs to establish security requirements, acceptance criterion, and test plans, which is exactly what we as security people tell companies to do when they're outsourcing or offshoring development. And we'll get into that discussion here shortly. But this is one regulation in this regard, at least, kind of hit the mark. And I'm not a big fan of regulations normally, but this one does hit the mark. But that being said, moving out of the boring realm of regulations and such, what I do want to discuss here is a report from the trenches. In addition to doing application security consulting work, I also help organizations respond to security breaches, incident response, and computer forensics. And I have a case here which is of